My name is Jocelyn Wong, and I'm the Director of Public Engagement here at the NHA. Welcome to our NHA Lecture Series. Today we will hear from NHA Verney Research Fellow Janet M. Davis. Janet is a professor of American Studies and History at the University of Texas, Austin. She is the author of 2 award-winning books, The Gospel of Kindness, Animal Welfare, and the Making of Modern America, and The Circus Age, Culture and Society Under the American Big Top. She has written opinion pieces for the New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, and other media outlets. Janet regularly serves as a public humanities consultant and is currently researching and writing her new book, Sharkmania, A Transnational American History, which explores human and shark entanglements from the age of sail to the Jaws age. Janet's talk this evening will explore the cultural and environmental history of America's obsession with sharks. As the historical epicenter of the nation's whaling industry and the childhood summer home of Peter Benchley, author of Jaws, Nantucket has been a key location for human and shark entanglements across time. Please welcome Janet Davis.
It's just a delight to be here this evening, and thanks to all of you for being here. And I just also want to offer a few more thanks to Michael Harrison, Amelia Holmes, Annalee Gilbert-Keith, Matthew Kunart, Jocelyn, and colleagues at the Nantucket Historical Association for everyone's archival expertise, hospitality, generosity of spirit, and support under the generous auspices of the E. Jeffrey and Elizabeth Thayer Verney Fellowship. It's really just great to be here. Thank you so much. I've just gotten underway in the library's collection, so this is my second day of research. Therefore, some of the materials haven't quite made it into my my analysis yet, but they will. And I'm gonna start a stopwatch because I have 51 slides, and I apologize for that in advance. So if I hit the 45-minute mark, the vaudeville hook comes out in my mind and it takes me away, all right? So I'll just stop there. But what I want to do tonight is run through kind of the dimensions of what I'm thinking about with sharks. And Nantucket plays a really important part in that history. So when we think about sharks, we tend to think about, and let me get started here, we think about this. We think about the open maw with the teeth. We might think about Sharknado. But look at that. There they are in the background. Carcharodon carcharias is right there at the ready. And that was the last Sharknado, I think. Okay. Fonzie jumping the shark on Happy Days, so good, and has become a metaphor for so much of life, for sure. September 20th, 1977. And so we think about, this kind of constancy of the kind of generic, distilled great white shark with open maw. But in the class of cartilaginous vertebrate fish, Chondrichthyes, and the subclass Elasmobranchi, there are over 500 shark species, which is, I think it's easy to forget that. We have the dwarf lantern shark, super cute at 7.8 inches long in your hand, bioluminescent too, that's a plus. To the largest, the whale shark, which can be between 40 and 60 feet long. So amazing, beautiful, beautiful sharks. And then this one is the one that totally blows me away, the Greenland shark. There was a study done in 2016, Dutch marine biologists, who found through a study of the eye lenses of deceased Greenland sharks that they ranged in age between 272 years old, the youngest ones, to 512 years old. So in 2016, that puts us back to 1504. So as a context, that was when King Henry VII was king of England. It was still like 5 years before his son, better known, Henry VIII, came to the throne. So it's just amazing. So many different sharks. But in the kind of cultural imagination, in addition to the kind of pop culture shark, bless you, that I mentioned, we have some other apex predator sharks who occupy a lot of people's attention. And they occupy a lot of my attention too, okay? Because shark bite is very rare, unprovoked shark bite, especially a death by shark bite. But these are the species that are most implicated historically, and they live in a range of environments that are also historically situated places of contact between people and sharks. Okay, so we have the oceanic white-tip shark, known as the shipwreck shark, deep ocean apex predators. We have the bull shark, who tends to live in the shallows. They actually can live in brackish waters and even in fresh waters, so they have a range of names around the world related to specific river environments as well. But they're in the beach zone, okay? We have the tiger shark, who's mostly likes warmer waters, and they can be in a range of marine environments. And they eat anything, actually. Tiger sharks they eat common yellowthroats, a tiny warbler species, and they can eat trash cans. So, you know, it ranges, but probably not much nutrition in the trash can, but they'll swallow stuff. So, and then we have the grand shark of them all, the great white shark. Here is one leaping for seals at False Bay in South Africa. And so these are the 4 sharks who are very much a part of my analysis. And one of the things that has, come over the years is that a recent movie, Sharksploitation, in 2023, if any of you have seen it, it's really good. It talks about film and the influence of film in shaping popular ideas about sharks. And when I first came to this project, I actually came to it in a conversation with an editor at the press that published my first book. And we were thinking about a book dealing with a year in time. And so I thought, 1975, Jaws came out. That's what I'm going to do. So I went to the Peter Benchley collection at Boston University, did research, started digging, and then I realized we're going to need a bigger archive, okay? Because the letters that fans wrote to Benchley as the author of Jaws went way back in time to talk about their experiences. And so just how far back in time I decided to go came about as a result of Frederick Douglass, the great abolitionist and statesman. He was the minister in residence in Haiti under the Harrison administration. And when he was serving as the co-commissioner of the Haitian Pavilion at the World Columbia Exposition in Chicago in 1893, he gave a speech that was later transcribed in the pages of the Chicago Defender, a black newspaper. And here's what he said. He was talking about the historical revolutionary significance of Haiti as an independent black republic. And he said this: "Until Haiti spoke, the slave ship followed by hungry sharks, greedy to devour the dead and dying slaves flung overboard to feed them, plowed in peace in the South Atlantic, painting the sea with Negro blood." So that got me thinking in a hurry, in a really profound way, about this relationship with the Atlantic slave trade. And that inquiry took me to this painting, which some of you have probably seen. You can see here, do you see the fins in the water? This is a painting that was created. J.M.W. Turner was a British abolitionist in 1840, and he was remembering the Zong massacre of 1781, in which a British slave ship coming from Ghana to Jamaica, actually, they threw 130 people into the water. The ship was overloaded to start, and they wanted to claim a loss with their insurance company and collect the profit, okay? The insurance company denied their claim, and that sparked a courtroom showdown between the insurer and the owners of this ship. And that's why we have a paper trail of it. Now, so it's just a horrific kind of cultural memory, but it is in line with this larger history and the connection. And I've seen sources that talk about the weaponization of sharks that are just following these ships to quell the very constant possibility of mutiny on these ships and rebellion. So it's a very sordid history. And we also see other evidence of enslaved people on boats in the presence of sharks. This is, of course, John Singleton Copley's very famous painting, Watson and the Shark. Watson was about 14 years old, I believe. He was an orphan. He was a British, had a very distinguished career in England long after the fact, but it shows, you can kind of see his injury in the water, and he truly was bitten by a shark in Havana Harbor in several years before this happened. By this time, Watson was a distinguished person in England. And so this is a part of this history, and so I feel that I have to talk about it. So that's what I'm doing, and I'm going to write about it. And it'll be an interesting, it'll be a very, very challenging chapter to write, but I feel I have to do it. And so the next area of inquiry takes me into whaling, okay? Into the age, and we're in the age of sail in both of these case studies. And here in Nantucket, I'm reading logs, I'm doing all sorts of research related to the whaling industry and looking at contact with sharks, because as many of you know, in Moby Dick, for example, Herman Melville talks about, he has a chapter called The Shark Massacre, in which he talks very vividly about the presence of sharks on the scene of the whaling ships where the body of the whale has just been lashed. And so before, as the cutting is about to take place, and so people would, have spears, and this is a terrible cigarette card image, it's not very good, but look, you can see the presence of the sharks on this cigarette card, and you can see the instruments that are used to blunt the blow of the shark. And so this is something that is very much, I'm interested in exploring that relationship as well. And couple other things, interested in whaling as a place for people of color to seek freedom from the racism on land. I mean, they met it in the seas as well, but at the same time, this is something that Harriet Jacobs, the author of Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, both her brother and her son went into whaling. So I'm interested in that relationship as well. And Michael Harrison of the library has graciously shared with me some sources that he's looked into, and I'm going to be looking into these sources as well, related to the practice of sharking, which is shark fishing in the 1840s onward that became a part of life here because New Bedford was the future of whaling and Nantucket was quickly becoming its past. So in the 1840s, you have the development of new railroad infrastructure. You also have a very deep water port in New Bedford. So that's its future. And so Nantucketers were thinking about how are we going to, what are we going to do next? And so tourism becomes a very important part of the island. And sharking, taking tourists, whalers who had deep knowledge, of course, and expertise with their boats and with the act of fishing and, hunting at sea. And so they, in turn, would take tourists out to hunt sharks. So I'm very interested in that as well. And the other thing that is part of this transformation then, too, is the growth of an entertainment economy and a leisure beach-based economy here, but also in other parts of the United States. So one of the places that I'm looking to, William Cameron Coupe, he's one of my circus people that I've done a lot of work on. In the 1870s, he had an aquarium in New York. And you can see, here's a shark pictured in this magazine exposition. And Coupe was the person who taught P.T. Barnum how to be a circus man. So this guy knew what he was doing. But no one really knows much about this guy, but he's someone I care about a lot. And so anyway, he wanted to have a shark exhibit so badly. And he worked with the fishermen at Fulton Fish Market. And he said, come on, I'll pay you, get the sharks, bring them up, and I'm gonna have this great exhibit of sharks, live sharks. Well, guess what happened? They died, okay? Either going in transport or in the actual, in the aquarium. So that was the end of that. But what we also see here, of course, is the rise in the world of kind of emphasis on physical fortification and bodily promise of strength, swimming, beach-based leisure, and the sea as a place of rejuvenation. And so what we see here is the rise of beach communities like Beach Haven, New Jersey. Okay, so thinking about these beaches, well, they became the place of kind of an unfolding national drama in 1916, July 1st to July 12th. Over the course of that period, there were 4 people who were fatally bitten by sharks in coastal New Jersey, and a 5th who was seriously injured. And this was the stuff of national crisis on the almost eve of the US's entry into World War I, when there was a polio epidemic that summer. There was also U-boats that are cruising off in the Atlantic, kind of like sharks. And so people were nervous. And it really was this incredible kind of national exegesis about the fear of what seemed to be a rogue shark out on the prowl. And so what happened, and there were all sorts of theories. One person theorized that it was the Category 3 hurricane that hit Mississippi that sucked the water, this is like early Sharknado, and brought those sharks, those tropical sharks, up to the cooler maritime waters of coastal New Jersey. People had all sorts of theories. Some people thought it was like crazed sea turtles that were doing this. So people didn't know a lot about sharks in this time. So this is another signpost here. And so what happened is a kind of frenzy of killing sharks in coastal New Jersey at this time to find the killer. And there were a couple sharks that were found and killed that had human remains inside of them. And it probably was bull sharks and maybe a juvenile great white that were responsible for this, because one of the sites of the location where 2 people died was in Matawan Creek, which, as you can see, is a brackish inlet that comes out into the sea in Keyport, New Jersey, okay? And so kids were swimming there, and 2 of them were killed by this shark. And so, interestingly enough, I had a really great kind of firsthand account of someone who was living as a kid in Keyport, New Jersey, who wrote to Peter Benchley, author of Jaws, to tell him about it. And so she saw one of the dead sharks as an exhibit. And so this is her account. In her letter, next, quote, I would like to compare, all caps, your shark with, all caps, my shark. A neighbor took me along with his children, and he paid 10 cents apiece for the bairns, the little kids, and a quarter for himself. We joined the long line of people who were sordidly involved in the tragedy. I remember the smell. It was less than a stench and more than an odor. I reached for the platform before I was able to see the shark. It was lying in a bed of ice, and it seemed to me that he took up almost the whole building. He was full of scars and sores, and his stomach was white and repulsive looking. We were breathless and struck with awe by this lifeless creature. Paying our entrance fee was probably the biggest bargain that our benefactor ever had, for we could not forget this Leviathan, and I haven't to this day. every time we walked out into Raritan Bay in order to learn to swim, the whole thing came back to me. So she was an older woman at this time when she wrote to Peter Benchley prior to the movie version of Jaws coming out, and she wanted to let him know, and he saved her letter, so I could read it too. So, of course, always in the mood to be an impresario, Harry Houdini got in on the act. Okay, so he actually, right after the Jersey Shore attacks, he placed ads in papers saying, hey, everybody, if you'll get a big shark for me, I'll wrestle with it and kill it in a tank. And I'll pay you $500 for it. No one could do it. No one could meet the challenge of getting his shark. But he was someone who liked to get out of terrible situations in shark-infested waters, as you can see here. And he was very much part of that kind of promotional culture of taking sharks and using them to make money, which was becoming a thing at this point. So the next place that I want to turn to, after we've just talked about this, the beach zone, if you will, as being a site of new contact in an age of swimming, physical culture, beach resorts, all of this is happening in the early 20th century. And another place where this is also happening, but is also a site of American overseas expansion, is Hawaii, okay? And so this is a place that is a really rich place to be thinking about sharks for a lot of different reasons, because culturally, to Kanaka Maoli people, the native Hawaiians, sharks are part of their cosmologies. These are seafaring people who have lived among, lived in the ocean and traveling the oceans for the millennium. And so as a result, sharks occupy a space of healthy respect, caution, of course, but also as ancestral spirits through the concept of Amama Kua, which is this, you can see it written up there. And this is a children's story that exemplifies this, kind of relationship that is more, it's less adversarial and more kind of kinship-based. Not worshiping per se, but recognizing sharks as part of a broader web of life. And certainly Kanaka Maoli people did not, they used sharks as inspirations for designs. These are featherwork designs for royalty, and you can see the fin, or these are the teeth designs here, and then I can show you fin designs as well. And these are made out of bird feathers. And we see, for example, the brilliant yellow Hawaii mamo bird, who is now extinct, and the red iiwi honey creeper is very critically endangered. And some folks assume that, it's because people were plucking their feathers. Well, it's actually because of the advent of mosquitoes. And mosquitoes transmit all sorts of disease, and that came with colonialism, the arrival of all these different animals. And so that's what really has done it for these folks. But in any case, I also want to talk about the fact that Queen Liliuokalani, she was the last sovereign of the Kalakua dynasty. She was overthrown during the American coup of 1893, and then Hawaii became a U.S. territory in 1898 by simple congressional majority. And the queen was someone who was very proud of Hawaiian, indigenous culture. And so with the arrival of the Americans, American colonists who had been there as missionaries to start. So let me make this clear that this is a long relationship. This is something that starts in 1820, where a couple from Massachusetts made their long journey overland and then by sea and arrived on my birthday, March 30th, but 1820. And they were the first. They were the first American missionaries there. And so they began this long process of American proselytization and American industry too, with the growth of pineapple and sugar first and pineapple plantations as well. So it really changes the island's geography, the ecology, and culture as well. And they also practice as they become, statesmen and women in the late 19th century with the territorial seizure of Hawaii, become kind of cultural assimilators too. And one of the things that really takes a definite kind of beating, if you will, are the kind of honoring and preserving and promoting of Kanaka Maoli culture and life, and rather the emphasis becoming assimilation, becoming Christian, and becoming, removing and rejecting their cultural lives. Very similar to indigenous people on the mainland through the Bureau of Indian Affairs, similar policies. And so all of this comes to a head in 1913 when, and actually I'll say this too, is that during this time, a tourism industry starts forming, and sharking is part of it. So let me just read you a newspaper article, not the whole thing, but just a quote, from March 19th, 1916 in the Honolulu Star Bulletin, announcing the excursion yacht of La Paloma, quote, left on a shark hunt this morning, taking a party of tourists and towing a dead horse for shark bait. And so this is part of that, for the Kanaka Maoli, this is a real assault on their belief system. And so in 1913, on February 7th, the Navy, the US Navy, had been building a dry dock in Pearl Harbor. And guess what happened on that date? It collapsed, okay? It just totally collapsed. And one of the things that definitely, there was a real mystery. What caused it? And among Kanaka Maoli, of the islands, they had an answer for it. It was the shark goddess seeking her revenge. And so reading the oral histories at the Bishop Museum in Honolulu, I've read some really great kinds of analysis of Kanaka Maoli talking about why this happened. That this was the shark goddess saying, back off, let us be. So it's a really, I think, a window into that process of colonialism and the ways in which sharks can sit at the center of all of these things that are going on in society. And so the dry dock was rebuilt, and on April 8th, 1919, it was finalized with an official offering of a pig, a chicken, and a fish to the resident shark goddess, because that's what was necessary. So I'm going to move on now to talk about another really important period in this world of shark mania through the centuries, okay? And this is World War II, okay? World War II, I really argue, is this is a super, super watershed period, because oceanic theaters of war span the globe, for one thing. And this is a time when 16 million Americans serve in the armed forces. Another 15 million are moving to centers of wartime production, oftentimes on coasts. And those coastal cities are places that often have beaches. And if you're working at a plant making B-24s or making, gun cases or whatever the war-related item is, you're tired and you want to soak in the surf after a while. So this becomes another place that people encountered sharks. The most kind of, the biggest place, of course, was for service personnel who were serving in the oceanic theaters. And so one person, for example, 5th U.S. Army Air Force's General George Kenney, he enthusiastically was applauding the adoption of the new airplane, the P-38. And this is what he said, because it had twin engines. And that meant that if one died, well, you still had another engine. And he said, you know, you look down from the cockpit and you can see schools of sharks swimming around. They never look healthy to a man flying over them. By the time he gets 400 or 500 miles out over the ocean, his morale has been going down steadily by looking at that water down there. And my guess is that he would arrive at combat with a 50% efficient pilot. So this kind of fear of what really becomes almost a meme, shark-infested waters, fills newspapers. You see reports about shark-infested waters, whether or not people who were ditched at sea with an airplane that had been bombed, or a ship sinking, torpedoed, or bombed, or just running out of gas, which certainly happened a lot, that the presence of shark-infested waters, whether or not sharks were actually there, was a deep source of fear for American service personnel. And you see it all over the place. Okay, so here we lend our money, buy war stamps, buy bonds every day. Look what's there, shark-infested waters. And somewhere over the Pacific was often the biggest kind of shark-infested waters location in this reportage. I would say, in many ways, it echoed earlier language and reproduced that language that also was used to describe the Japanese combatants in racist terms. You see reports talking about shark-infested waters of the Makassar Straits off the coast of Bali and the Lombok Strait nearby as infested with Japanese seaborne invasion hordes. That's the language used that echoes the xenophobic language, reproduces it, that had been part of the American lexicon since the 19th and early 20th century. And it really participates in what historian John Dower talks about, the Pacific War as a race war. So sharks being tied into that. And so you see report after report, and I'm not going to read all of them, obviously, for lack of time, but really harrowing accounts of people who encountered sharks. And even reports, this is an example during the Battle of Leyte Gulf in the Philippines in October of 1944, where you had survivors of a sinking of the USS Princeton, and guess what the rescuers were doing? They were in whaleboats, and they're gunning the waters because there were sharks nearby, but there were also people swimming, right? So you never know what's going to be more dangerous, the people who are there to save you versus the sharks that are there. And so for Black soldiers and Black service personnel, the presence of Jim Crow racism and added to the trauma of shark-infested waters. And so Black newspapers were really very much using that language of shark-infested waters to amplify the heroism of Black service personnel, such as Charles Jackson French, who in the Solomon Islands towed 15 injured white seamen to safety for 6 to 8 hours. And really amazing, this is in a gum card, a card inside chewing gum. And the other person, another just example, George Nelson, who was in the Merchant Marine, was on a raft for 39 days with his white Merchant Marine mates. And he's the person who dove from the ship that was bombed and grabbed the raft out of the water. So he was instrumental. They're at sea for 39 days. They land on the coast of French Guiana, right into the hands of the Vichy French. So Nelson spoke French, and he was able to convince, these folk that we've been at sea for 39 days. Please take care of us. And they did. They were great. Well, they get to Miami, and you can see through this headline here, torpedoed seaman tells stirring sea saga, faces Jim Crow after 39 days without food. And when they got to Miami, Nelson was denied entry into the hotel because he was Black. And so the shark-infested waters, if you read this story, are so prominent in amplifying his heroism and the kind of dangers that people faced. And Nelson ultimately returned to sea. He thought, you know, I'm gonna fight for the Double V campaign against fascism and racism. Whereas French had a sadder outcome. He was recommended for the Silver Cross or for the Navy Cross, but he never received any recognition of his heroism. And he was traumatized by the twin, horrors of wartime violence and also racism, and he died very young, and he had substance abuse problems too. So it's a very sad outcome. And so during World War II, just to talk a bit about this for just a moment, and then we'll hopefully get to the Jaws Age for just a couple minutes. Okay, so there was a major propaganda campaign by the Office of Strategic Services and the Navy to allay service personnel fears of shark-infested waters. And they published pamphlets like Shark Sense, okay? And Shark Sense advised that you could literally, if you were faced with a shark, you could hold on to its dorsal fin and hold on. Go for a ride through the water, you'll be okay. It's a whole range of different things, tons of different propaganda-related campaigns, because World War II marks the first war in American history where psychiatric testing of every enlistee, every enlisted person who was in the services, if you didn't pass that test, you got kicked out. And so morale was critical. And so the Office of Strategic Services, precursor to our modern CIA, in addition to the branches of the military, thought we have to combat shark fear. So, and I don't have time to talk much about this, they developed a shark repellent. It didn't work, and they knew it at the time. But they thought that its importance as something that would help boost morale was worth it. So it enters the marketplace in 1945 at war's end, basically. But it was under development for a few years, and as a means of saying, we are on this and we are going to do something about sharks, okay? So ultimately, World War II is a major moment, and the USS Indianapolis, July of 1945, delivering the components of the atomic bomb to Tinian, and bombed at sea the surviving crew, out of over 1,100 crewmen, 316 ultimately survived. And sharks were part of this experience, for sure. And the last survivor of the USS Indianapolis only fairly recently passed away, Edgar Harrell. And he recalled later on that years later, while in Hawaii on a business trip, I decided to walk down to the edge of the ocean. But when I got close, I stopped and stared. It was as though I was in a hypnotic trance. As I looked out on the open sea, suddenly I could see myself swimming. I could see sharks. The faces of shipmates and bloated bodies. I could hear men screaming in my mind. Finally, I realized I had to walk away. To this day, I will not set foot in the ocean. So that trauma of World War II for him distilled in that experience of shark-infested waters. Very much a part of that. And so with that, I think I have just a few more minutes of time. Is that okay? A few more minutes? Okay. Let me just come on here and check in. I should have put, okay, yeah, actually 37 minutes, that's where we're at. I've got time to talk about Jaws. All right, so just a few more minutes of talk here before we get into our discussion here. But one of the people who's really important after World War II in readying Americans for the Jaws Age is this guy, Monster Man Frank Mundus. He was a shark fisherman on Montauk, and he would take ordinary people out on these open boats on the weekends. There was a fisherman's special that left from Penn Station just near the bars. People would go have some drinks, and then at 3 a.m., stumble onto the train, and you're out on Montauk ready to fish. And then they'd have an ice hold on the way back. You could store your fish and come on back. So it was a good deal for folks. And during the week, Mundus would take customers who had a lot more money out on his boat for private tours. And so one day in June 5th, 1964, he's taking customers out at sea, and he harpooned a huge great white shark. She was gigantic. She was 17 and a half feet. Her circumference was 13 feet. Imagine that. She's like a submarine. And she was just an incredible, incredible, incredible animal. And he harpooned her, dragged her to shore behind the boat, and then, cut out her jaws. And she sat there, press gathered. People told the story of this giant shark. It made the news, so it was published in the papers. One of the people who was looking at the news was a young journalist from an illustrious family who has a place here in Nantucket. And that person, this is the Benchley family's summer home, that was Peter Benchley. And this shark that Frank Mundus killed lived in his imagination. It became the muse of a novel. He kept that folded story in his pocket for years, and he would brandish it to people and say, I'm gonna write a story. I'm gonna write a book about a novel, about a shark, a great white, that comes to a community and takes possession of it. And eventually that's just what he did. On February 1st, 1974, his novel Jaws was published. Here's the early cover of it. It went through multiple drafts. It's really a war novel, in my opinion, because it deals with a society that is riven by division and the Vietnam War, all sorts of things are happening in that novel. There is very risque marital infidelity in the novel. And it is, something, it speaks to a culture that is in turmoil, and the shark amplifies that turmoil. And the main characters in the novel, Brody, Hooper, Quint, they're ultimately the people who dispatch the shark. But in the novel, not everyone lives. And actually not in the movie either, but more people die in the novel. And so in any case, I don't have a lot of time to go on about it, but just suffice to say that Jaws was a huge hit. It was absolutely a huge hit. It was quickly seized, even before publication, by Universal Pictures to become a movie. So as Benchley was finishing up, getting it out there, the movie was already in its kind of infancy. And so, in any case, what happens is that these producers, Brown and Zanuck, they decided that, we're gonna make a movie, and we're gonna have a trained shark that's gonna do all these tricks to make it extra spectacular. Okay, that's what they were thinking. Here's the movie, the very iconic poster. And I'll get back to that story in just a moment about their thinking about that trained shark that's gonna do all this good stuff for the audience. Well, when the movie came out, it was a huge smash hit. Many of you remember it. I saw it in the theater when it came out. I loved it so much. It grossed $60 million in its first month. Its director, now at this point, at the movie's release, was 28-year-old Steven Spielberg. He was an unknown. And it became the first film to earn $100 million based on studio profits after all the other theaters had collected their exhibition fees and all of that. So it was a huge hit. There were Jaws beach towels, Jawberry ice cream, Jaws beach blankets, you name it. Jaws lunchbox, which I have, which I'll show you in just a moment. But people would get frenzied. There was a depression in beach communities. I'm curious about Nantucket specifically, so that's something to look at in the archives. Was it affected by Jaws in the summer of '75? Well, in any case, then what was a kind of Jaws mania. And So back to the story of the production of it. And the reason I say this is because it affects how it was received. Okay, that's one of my little arguments here. And first of all, so Brown and Zanuck, the producers, they thought you could train a shark. Guess what they were influenced by? SeaWorld, also Flipper, all these cetacean mammal cetacean shows of, they thought sharks will do this stuff too, right? Wrong. Benchley was like, are you kidding? When Benchley was a kid here in Nantucket, on summering here, he had lots of contact with sharks. He knew a lot about them. So that was really a deep part of his knowledge. So he was someone who knew what he was doing in that regard. But in any case, the producers thought that they could have a trained shark, and they couldn't. So what did they do? You all know what happened. They had fakes built instead. Bruce. There were 3 Bruces used in the production. I believe there is a 4th Bruce who's still out there. The 3 basically decayed afterwards. They caused so many problems when the movie was being made, so much so that the movie's sense of ominousness is predicated on the fact that you don't see the shark very much. But guess why you don't see the shark very much? It's because it was constantly breaking down, okay? And so because it was constantly breaking down, you have this suspense. John Williams' 2-note heartbeat, dun, 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 that's your signal that shark is somewhere out there. So it's terrifying. So that ultimately helped it become a better movie. Here is Spielberg as well. There he is in the jaws of Bruce, 25 feet. And it affected where the movie was made, too. You had to have a flat, sandy bottom that stretched on in a kind of a shallow space. Martha's Vineyard. That's why it was chosen. Amity was supposed to be on Long Island, but the film was made in Martha's Vineyard. And I'll just show you a couple other things. Here's a Jaws lunchbox. Huge hit worldwide. And so Jaws has 3 actual impacts, and then I'm going to wrap it up. Okay. The first is there's a spike in tournament sharking after the movie came out. Here's an example of that right here. And the second impact is the rise of a kind of kitsch shark. Bruce is a machine, and is a goofy machine. And so the rise of these kind of goofy, fun, here's a circus in Mexico, Tiburon. Fake sharks, Jaws on the water in Austin, where you can be grabbed underneath the water. Seriously, this is a kind of pre-COVID thing that I hope comes back so much because I want to do it. You're sitting there having your drinks and your food, and you're watching Jaws in a raft, and then someone grabs your leg, and the movie's on. Awesome. All right. Jaws ride in Japan. Yes. And, of course, Pink Fong, the most downloaded YouTube, or even streamed YouTube video, 2015. But you also have, and there's a little kitsch involved in OShark, which is a tracking organization. They have shark names like Cubs Win. Mary Lee was the first. She's disappeared. She disappeared in 2017. But she has a Twitter account, now X, with, I believe, 113,000 followers. So they update, when the sharks surface, send a signal to the satellite, that triggers a notification on whatever social media you like. So that's something, but it's also in the name of science, too. And so the other place is here in Massachusetts. Greg Skomall is a shark biologist. So this is impact number 3, is that Jaws, through the character of Matt Hooper, a marine scientist, a biologist, inspired generations of people to become shark biologists, including Greg Skomall, who is here in Massachusetts. So there's 2 more things I just want to say very quickly. As you know, you've read about this, shark populations globally are in deep trouble. I mean, it's a combination of so many different factors. Oceanic white-tip sharks are critically endangered, which is one stage away from extinction, beginning that extinction process. It's industrial fishing, bycatch, finning, all of these things, climate change, all of these things are working in tandem to make things hard for sharks. But I want to end positively. The impact decades after the fact of the Marine Mammal Protection Act of 1972 means that coastal populations of pinnipeds, gray seals in particular, mean that coastal populations of Carcharodon carcharias, great white sharks, have increased dramatically, which of course poses other things that we can talk about in just a moment. But that does suggest that there are things, I hope, that we all can do to save and protect these magnificent creatures. So thank you so much for your attention. I appreciate it so much. Thank you. And now I just wanted to say that when you ask a question, please start when the microphone reaches your hand, because that way it can be recorded, okay? So thanks. If anyone has any questions. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I want to ask about, you hear about shark attacks at the beach.
Yes.
And then you find out someone was bit by a shark, and they got them up on the beach, and they've had a tourniquet, or they lost their hand, or they took a chunk out of their...
Yeah.
Do sharks, are there records of sharks eating people at beaches?
So there are records of sharks eating people, but extremely, extremely rare. Typically what happens in the scene that you described, sharks are curious creatures, and this may sound very alien to us, but they're exploring. And so they'll take an exploratory bite and a bump or a bite, into a person. And sometimes that bite lands on a major artery and can kill a person. But there are cases, very rare. There was a case in 1957, I think. I'm forgetting the exact date. But my family in California, they lived near La Jolla. And this incident took place. A couple of men I believe they were fishing, actually, spearfishing. So that can be a dangerous place. And so if someone is bitten as a result of, they have an animal attached to their spear, that doesn't usually count as an unprovoked attack, because they've essentially chummed the waters. So in those instances, that's where I have seen evidence, and in this particular case in La Jolla, of this young man, I believe his name was Robert Pamperin. He was bitten and carried off by a great white. But that is an extremely rare event. But it's certainly, have to acknowledge the fact that it has happened at times, but it's just so rare. I mean, I think I've read statistics that range from maybe 4 to 7 or 8, as many as 10 people around the entire world each year who die in unprovoked attacks. And whether or not the shark is actually consuming them is, that's a distinction, whether it's the exploratory bite that leads to death or if it's actual consumption. But it's an exceedingly rare event. But there's things you can do to mitigate any possibility of it too, yeah.
A follow-up, if
Sure.
I may.
Yeah, please.
We love picking blueberries in the summertime, and having a bowl of them just in the kitchen is the best way to eat them.
Yeah.
And one day, our 8-year-old son, who would just grab a handful of blueberries and throw them in his mouth, we were having some beans for dinner that night. They were in the colander, rinsed out.
Yeah.
He just grabbed a handful and threw them in his mouth and spit them out all over the kitchen sink.
Wow.
And I thought, is that what a shark does when it bites a surfer with a wetsuit on? I mean, I know people have died from it, and I don't want to downplay that. But
yes.
it seems like they thought they were getting blueberries, and then you just... spit them out.
Absolutely. No, that's a great, like vivid example to explain it, actually, because what happens typically in an incident like that, which is of course tragic, it's horrible. But what typically happens is if a shark is curious, take a bite, and then they're like, oh, I don't want this. Well, again, that might be someone whose femoral artery has just been burst, punctured. But the thing is that, the reason that white shark populations have escalated so much in recent years is because, as I ended my talk, of the Marine Mammal Protection Act, the population of these pinniped species, these gray seals and, a whole host of other seals, both on the West Coast and on the East Coast, have just exploded, and those seals are what blueberries are to your grandchild. They love them. Those are rich, delicious meals for a shark. We are, by contrast, rather bony. We're not that great from a shark's perspective. So so it's more of a mistake, typically if something happens in that encounter with a human. It's exceedingly rare for a shark to actually, carry the body away and eat it. But it has happened. I would be dishonest to say it hasn't happened, because it has. And in World War II, which is this important period in the history of Sharkmania, there were so many injured people in the water and people who had passed. And sharks are foragers, so they forage, and they're scavengers. So that's also a testament to the violence of war, a reality that is part of this story too. Yeah. Yeah.
So you made mention of some things that can be done to mitigate.
Yeah.
I'm a swimmer, I swim all year. So I know don't look like a seal.
Yes.
What else can you tell me?
Yeah, I can say that's the great question too. People who, there's a bunch of things. If there are seals in the area, don't swim around them, because that is gonna escalate your chances of being mistaken for one, or just being, the subject of a shark's curiosity. So in any feeding situation, whether it be seals, whether it be sardines, or any other feeding event, you don't want to be in the water with them. I mean, just as an example, when I was in Hawaii one time in 2008 with my family, it's my home years ago, there was, at Waimea Bay, the beach was closed, but people were still in the water. And here's what was going on. First, there was a shore break. So it was this high waves, like crashing right on shore. But in those waves were sardines, huge balls of sardines. And guess what was happening? Galapagos sharks and tiger sharks were swimming around and eating. I didn't want to be in the water with those animals, so that's an important one. Other things that people have suggested too, biologists say that swimming in the early, like at crepuscular times, either dawn or dusk, that can be a time where feeding might be occurring more readily, or at night. The other thing is in water that is murky. They say that might be problematic too, but that's less founded. The biggest of all is in a feeding situation.
So just to follow up on that,
Yeah.
I mean, I used to swim off the East Shore here,
Yeah.
mostly.
Yeah.
And I now call it the Seal Highway.
Yeah.
So should I not be in there at all?
No, I'd say you can be in there, yeah, as long as they're not, all over the place at the time. Because sometimes there are going to be masses of seals that are going to be present in a situation. And I don't know. I mean, that's what people tell me, and that's what I've read. But again, I think your environment the best, and so it's, even in those situations, it's still very, very unlikely. The danger really comes if you have to drive somewhere. That's the bigger danger in our lives is, for me, for sure, living in Texas, where people drive horribly. So there's these relative risks, I think. And swimming, obviously, is great for your health. So, you have to think of the kind of bigger picture. I'd probably keep swimming, I think.
Over there, and then I'll come back. I had a question about the classification of sharks.
Yeah.
So at the beginning of your period, that second half of the 18th century into the 19th century, it's when people are coming up with sort of like the Linnaean system of classifying animals. And I just wondered if in that period or even before, if sharks are a difficult case, like have people always thought of sharks as fish, or have they been puzzled by what to call sharks?
They have.
Yeah.
I mean, they're classified because they're cartilaginous vertebrate fish, but they're cartilaginous, which means a lot of their body, does not survive the historical record usually as cartilaginous creatures, but their teeth are very much, they're bony. And there's a lot of teeth in a shark's mouth, many sets of teeth. But as far as the classificatory kind of identity of sharks, I have to confess, I don't know the deep, kind of intellectual kind of science yet. That's an area that I need to dig into as I continue my research. I will say that people who wrote about sharks wrote about them as monsters, and honestly didn't know what they were, but they eventually enter into the system in this way. Sharks and rays are relatives, in the same order of animals. So I don't have a good answer for you, but I will soon because it's a great question. Yeah.
I'm kind of interested in what exactly was that CIA-produced shark repellent all about? Was it something you threw in the water and hoped the shark would go get it instead of you? Was it scent-based? What was it all about?
Gosh, well, I'm so glad you asked about this because, oh my gosh, I spent a whole week in the archives at the National Archives last summer wading into the weeds of Shark Chaser, the repellent. And so what oh my gosh, okay. I'll try to keep this brief because this is an in-the-weeds discussion. So a group of folks who were kind of lay shark scientists. One of the guys who was involved, he was involved in shark fishing for their livers because they're a rich source of vitamin A. And that becomes a big thing during World War II as well. So this guy becomes the expert that the OSS calls upon to lead this team, as is Douglas Burden, who was a filmmaker who also owned a place called Marine Studios that was like a dolphin show land in Jupiter Beach, Florida. So these aren't scientists per se, but in any case, what they did was Stuart Springer, the shark fisherman, he went to Woods Hole in Massachusetts and put dogfish in cages in tanks and would try stuff to see if anything repelled them. And eventually the project moves into the open ocean, both in Florida, La Jolla, and also off the coast of Peru. But what they did, they tried all these different concoctions. They tried clove oil, they tried asparagus, they tried rotten shark muscle, thinking, aha, this is it. It didn't work. I mean, and so they finally, and the funny thing is too, is that Julia McMillan worked, her name Julia Child, McMinnon, I'm forgetting her last name, but her name before she was married, but she, Julia Child, the chef, she actually worked as the assistant to Harold Coolidge, who was the head of the OSS's shark repellent program. And so people have had a blast thinking, ha, the French chef got her start making shark repellent, Alas, digging in the records, she wasn't there. I was so sad to, when you find something that just disappoints you historically, that disappointed me. But in any case, these folk went out into the ocean and tried things. First in that kind of controlled environment at Woods Hole, what they settled upon was copper acetate. And they had it encased in it was a capsule, I believe, that had inky dye that would also be part of it hitting the water, okay? And it would form this inky sea, and the copper acetate would supposedly keep sharks away. But here's the thing, they knew at the time, not gonna work. So Stuart Springer, he even said, like in all his correspondence of the stuff that I was reading, he's saying, I just hate to say this, that if you have a sinking or, like a catastrophic event where the service personnel are going in the water, it's not gonna do a thing. It's not going to do a thing. Maybe we could have someone, be the shark chaser designate who's throwing capsules in as the ship is sinking. No. I mean, they knew it wasn't going to work. Its primary kind of purpose was psychological, to help morale. And that was really the takeaway from Shark Chaser. It was even in the splashdown capsules of astronauts until 1973. So it had a good run, but it was really let's put it this way, this is the best example of a placebo, it's something that just, it really didn't
Another
work.
great story from the CIA.
Yeah, right? I know, it's really amazing seeing and there is voluminous correspondence and records at the National Archives dedicated to this program. So yeah, the ingredient list was just astounding. I was like, wow, okay, they tried that, okay. So anyway, yeah. All right.
Well, thank you so much,
Oh, you're
Janet,
so
for
welcome.
joining us
Thank
this
you.
evening.
Thank you.
Absolutely fascinating research, and now I'm rethinking that black wetsuit that I've been eyeing. Maybe it needs to be neon pink. So I just want to announce our next talk at the NHA will happen next Wednesday at 5 o'clock back here at the Whaling Museum. It'll feature a screening of the documentary Cosqueda Co. followed by a discussion between Dr. Jennifer Carberg from Nantucket Conservation Foundation and the trustees. So please join us in exactly a week back here at the museum. And I want to thank all of you for joining us this evening. And again, Janet, for traveling here from Texas to share her research.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much, Jocelyn.